I like to consider myself a functional environmentalist, not the grow your own mushrooms type of environmentalism, even though I do respect that type of environmentalism. It's more of a practical environmentalism. But I've studied sustainability. I work for my state's energy and environment cabinet. I just, at my core, feel kind of conflicted about environmentalism. One side of me wants to lead towards preservationism, the idea of preserving the world as it is around you. So what the National Park Service tries to do. I can understand why that is not the most practical use of land. So there's another side of me that's kind of pulled towards conservationism, which at its core is fundamentally different than preservationism, even though they're both technically environmentalism. Conservationism is all about reasonable and respectful use of land and developing it for humanity. The only problem with that is that there is no concrete definition of what reasonable usage is. It varies wildly by whichever corporation or person or whoever is at the table.
I was actually coming out here to pick up a cupcake.
A lot of those core ideas of conservationism come from this dude, John Locke.
You just called me ugly.
He was an Enlightenment philosopher. He took the Bible, specifically Genesis and a couple of the Psalms, Psalm 115, and interpreted it as the earth was a gift to humanity after being kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Therefore, we can do whatever we want with it. And as cool as that is, it doesn't really strike me in a very good way. The idea of environmental stewardship essentially gave the green light to colonialism and everything that Europeans got up to for about 1,000 years. Long story short, Locke comes around, says all of that, and then we have the suburban experiment. But to be clear, this isn't just a Europeans are bad argument. Believe me, it's not. That's really black and white. Indigenous cultures shaped the world around them too, and it wasn't always in a positive way. But indigenous people didn't have the resources that Europeans had. They weren't able to travel to another continent and kill off so many people with bacteria and plagues and actually just going out and war atrocities, that the climate of the world was significantly cooler the following years. That was the first anthropogenic change. That is insane to contextualize that. It's like Genghis Khan, except everyone talks about Genghis Khan doing that, but no one talks about the Spaniards doing that. So here I am somewhere in the middle of those two arguments. The preservationist side I agree with, and also the conservationist side, I agree with that one too. It's a hard dichotomy to find your place in. So to find my place in that, I took a course called Environmental Writing, and it had this professor, and he was a really cool dude. It's a story for another day. But he assigned this textbook. It's called American Writing Since Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau. It was just a collection of a bunch of different essays and papers, and it's assorted manuscripts from different environmental writers since Thoreau, believe it or not. The textbook was so good I actually ended up buying it out. It was way more expensive than it should have been. For a used textbook, $100 for a buyout is crazy. On top of the rental fee, like, what is that shit? But one of the pieces that really stuck with me was this essay from this guy named Edward Abbey. So one of the essays in that collection was called Polemic, Industrial Tourism and the National Park. When I first read it, I was enamored because it was about Arches, which is my favorite national park. It's in Utah in the Red Desert. It's awesome. But Edward Abbey is a bit of a character, and because it was for a college course, I couldn't just read it one time and be done with it. I had to actually read between the lines a little bit. In reading between the lines, there are I'll explain everything about that essay in a second. Let me just explain who Edward Abbey is real quick. Okay, so Edward Abbey was born in 1927 in a town, I can't remember which way it is. It's either a town named Pennsylvania in Indiana or a town named Indiana in Pennsylvania. It's dense town naming. His mom was a one-room schoolhouse English teacher, and he got a love of literature from her. His dad was more interesting, I guess would be a good way to say it. He was keep in mind, this is 1927, he was an anarcho-socialist, atheist, the whole 9 yards. He also instilled some worldviews into Abbey. These like anti-establishment worldviews that were not popular during the age of Americana. Those views are distilled down into Abbey's work, some 40 years after his dad died. It is seeping in all of the pages. You can just see it all, even in his fiction work. For a little bit of context, the essay I was talking about a second ago, the one that I'm going to be covering in here, Polemic, it's from a larger collection of essays. And the entire nonfiction piece is, you can see all of those worldviews in it. My lizard is moving around. Could bring him out. He is desert themed. Anyway, the collection of essays it has that worldview in it. And then also, even in Abbey's nonfiction work, like Monkey Wrench Gang, that book is about a gang of outlaws, environmental terrorists. Like, you can really see it in his work. Okay, but more on Abbey. So he is from, the greatest generation.
Times have changed, and we've often rewound the clock.
So it's 1945. It's the Great War, and he doesn't want to go to war because he doesn't like the government. He doesn't want to die for the government. Can't blame the man, being that it's World War II and Vietnam has not happened yet. There is a draft, and he's a fresh high school graduate. He's fairly healthy, so of course he gets drafted. Except he doesn't want to go. So what does he do? He gets in his car and he drives out west. He goes to the Four Corners region. And being out there, he kind of falls in love with it. In his writings, he had a lot of stuff to say about the desert. That's like his whole thing. In one of his earlier writings, he had this to say on it. Pinnacles of naked rock, the dark cores of ancient volcanoes, a vast and silent emptiness smoldering with heat, color, and indecipherable significance. I felt myself getting close to the west of my deepest imaginings, the place where the tangible and the mythical felt the same. Where are you going? You can't run from the United States government forever. Stop. You have something to say? But you can't run from the United States government forever, believe it or not. They will hunt you down, especially if you're a draft dodger. So when they eventually get him, he works as a clerk typist and then as military police in Italy for a little bit, and a couple different odd jobs in there. He gets promoted a couple times. He does pretty well, and then eventually he's kind of done with it, and he starts, letting out a little bit more of the anti-establishment thoughts, and he gets honorably discharged. Note the honorably. This experience starts to kind of reinforce his thoughts on the government. After his discharge, he took full advantage of the GI Bill and he went to college. He went to the University of New Mexico, a very fitting place for him. Throughout this time, he was somewhat socially awkward. And that's pretty well documented. It's generally accepted, too, that he was mainly socially awkward with men, but not so much with women, which just as a little microcosm is not that big of a deal. I can understand that. Whenever you look at that in the greater context of the rest of Abbey's life, it starts to have some troubling implications. Despite his social ineptitude, it apparently was not bad enough for him to not be able to take an editorial spot at the UNM student newspaper. And he takes the spot, and then he goes and he writes an editorial for him, right? Not a big deal. The editorial he writes for him is called Some Implications of Anarchy, and I couldn't find a copy of it online anywhere, unfortunately. It was apparently so bad that he was removed from the editorial position, and also UNM took all of the copies of that paper, gathered them up, seized them, and then destroyed them. And I'm very curious about what was in that. I guess we'll never know. And that was just a little slice of Abbey's anti-establishment thoughts. He also put posters up around the school that essentially said, hey, these draft cards you have, take them, tear them up, burn them, destroy them, shred them, whatever you can do. You don't have to listen to the federal government, which of course is not the best thing to do during wartime. And in doing that, he got the FBI on his tail, and he didn't really care that much about it. Later on in life, he said that he would be upset if the FBI was not tailing him, but they did keep tabs on him for the rest of his life. So apparently none of his antics were bad enough to get him expelled from the school, so he graduates with a bachelor's degree. It's in philosophy and English in 1951. Also, in 1951, he marries another UNM student. I guess she agreed with his thoughts, maybe? I don't know. The couple had a couple children, two of them, and one of them was named Aaron Paul Abbey, which is unfortunate now. This relationship did not last, though. They ended up getting divorced just a year later, and he ended up marrying his mistress. And that was the first time that he was a bit of an adulterer. Before they got divorced, though, he moved to Edinburgh with her. And he went to Edinburgh University as a grad student. And in being a grad student, he wrote a master's thesis. And sticking with the Abbey shtick, it had some very Abbey-like core questions, thesis questions. Quote, to what extent is the current association between anarchism and violence warranted? And insofar as the association is a valid one, what arguments have the anarchists presented, explicitly or implicitly, to justify the use of violence? That thesis was good enough to get him the Wallace Stegner Creative Writing Fellowship, which also was awarded to people like Wendell Berry. So, you know, big leagues for an environmental writer. So he does this for a little while, and then he ends up going back to the United States by 56 or 57. It's kind of a little bit loose too. He starts working for the National Park Service in Arches National Park as a seasonal ranger between the months of April and September. He was given a trailer and he lived on the park as a stay-in ranger about 20 miles away from Moab, Utah. And the job was sweet. He was essentially allowed to do whatever he wanted to do as long as he kept up with his responsibilities. And Abbey, being a writer, sits there and journals and writes down and documents essentially everything that happens to him during his time at the park. He would eventually turn those writings into the book Desert Solitaire, the one that Polemic's in. I swear, we're getting to the main point of this video. The book is not particularly long. It's about 250, 300 pages or so. It's pretty thin. But it checks all the boxes of a good piece of environmental writing. It has great descriptions of the landscape. It is interesting to listen to. There is a very strong voice in it because it's Abbey writing. It's also one of the most controversial pieces of environmental writing. When Abbey was writing the book, he knew that it was going to be a very, very controversial book. The introduction to the book even details how controversial it's going to be. And the fact that he knows that it's going to be controversial and he is still publishing it and saying all of his thoughts really kind of speaks to his character, and I respect that. It's a very good piece of writing. Anyway, this is what he has to say about the controversial nature of the book. A quote, aside from the modest pretension, the book is fairly plain and straight. Certain faults will be obvious to the general reader, of course, and for these I wish to apologize. I quite agree that much of the book will seem coarse, rude, bad-tempered, violently prejudiced, unconstructive, even frankly antisocial in its point of view. Serious critics, serious librarians, serious associate professors of English will read this work and dislike it intensely. At least I hope so. To others, I can only say that the book has its virtues that cannot be disentangled from the faults, that there is a way of being wrong that is also sometimes necessarily right. Also, just for the record, Abbey is no longer alive. He died in '89 at 62 from liver cirrhosis. He had a very fitting wish for his funeral, but before I get to that, his final words, quote unquote, he died and he left a note on his desk next to him, and it just said no comment, which is, you know, Abbey. Okay, spark notes are out of the way. Let's talk about Desert Solitaire a little more. As I mentioned a second ago, Abbey has a very particular way of writing. He writes with a lot of detail, and just as every good writer should be able to, he is able to transport you to wherever he is writing about. You can see what he saw, feel what he felt, smell, hear, etc. Here's an example of that from the first morning, the first chapter in the book. The sun is not yet set in sight, but the signs of the advent are plain to see. Lavender clouds sail like a fleet of ships across the pale green dawn. Each cloud, planed flat on the wind, has a base of fiery gold. Southeast, 20 miles by line of sight, stand the peaks of the Sierra La Sal, 12 to 13,000 feet above the sea level, all covered with snow and rosy in the morning sunlight. The air is dry and clear as well as cold. The last fog banks left over from the last night's storm are scuttling away like ghosts, fading into nothing before the wind and the sunrise. The view is open and perfect in all directions except for the west, where the ground rises and the skyline is only a few hundred yards away. Looking towards the mountains, I can see the dark gorge of the Colorado River 5 or 6 miles away, carved through the sandstone mesa. There is nothing but river itself down inside the gorge. Southwest, on the far side of the river, lies the Moab Valley between the 1,000-foot walls of rock, with the town of Moab somewhere in the valley floor, too small to be seen from here. Before the Moab Valley is more canyon and tableland stretching away to the Blue Mountains 50 miles south. On the north side of the northwest, I see the Rowan Cliffs and the Book Cliffs, the two level faces of the Unta Plateau. Along the foot of these cliffs, maybe 30 miles off and visible from where I stand, runs US 650, a major east-west artery of commerce, traffic, and rubbish, and the main line of the Denver-Rio Grande Railroad. To the east, under the spreading sunrise, are more mesas, more canyons, leagues on leagues of red cliffs and arid tablelands extending through the purple haze over the bulging curve of the planet to the ranges of the Colorado, a sea of desert. Within the vast perimeter, in the middle ground and the foreground of the picture, are rather personal to miss, are the 30,000 acres of Arches National Monument, of which I am now the sole inhabitant, observer, and custodian. Writing like this is not accidental. It comes from a very deep understanding and a very deep respect of the world around you, which Abbey definitely has. A lot of times when I'm reading, I have trouble visualizing where the speakers are. It just comes off as people standing in a white room, and objects exist whenever they are written on the page. But with Abbey, he describes the landscape in a way that it kind of lingers, it sticks around, and I think that is very cool. I think it's very cool. It's engaging. I don't know. Abbey's writing doesn't feel like reading someone else's writing. It feels like being dropped into their memory, and I think Abbey researching what he's talking about first off, and also documenting in his journals, really helps him get his point across. In doing that though, it's very easy, and this is what I was talking about with the first time I read it, it's very easy to get blindsided to Abbey's actual thoughts on things. He has this weird possession of the world around him. Sometimes you have to read between the lines, but a lot of times it's kind of on full display with the way that he talks about the world. He has this hunger for solitude, and he kind of thinks that he is entitled to solitude and entitled to the areas where he can get solitude. Quote, standing there, gaping at this monstrous and inhuman spectacle of rock and cloud and sky and space, I feel a ridiculous greed and possessiveness come over me. I want to know it all, possess it all, embrace the entire scene intimately, deeply, totally. An insane wish? Perhaps not. At least there's something else. No one human to dispute possession with me. And that is an example. That one's very forthright in his desire to possess. He literally says he has a desire to possess. And a lot of his other writings, especially in the controversial one, Polemic, it is a little bit more between the lines, and people get blindsided either by his other controversial takes or the way that he describes the world around him to kind of ignore the fact that he has problematic thoughts on ownership. He wants to claim that he is a preservationist, that he thinks the world should be kept in the way that it is, but the idea of owning land is almost entirely a conservationist and John Locke idea. There's an entire ecosystem in that land that he can't really own. He can't really even touch it without kind of messing it up. That's what Leopold talks about in the Sand County Almanac. It's what a lot of preservationists talk about. It's so delicate that if someone were to possess it, even if they were to possess it with the best intentions, it's near impossible to not disrupt it. He claims he wants the desert to be untouched and empty, but he also says that he can go in there and untouch it, essentially. It's weird. He's the only one he trusts to do stuff, which, like, I can't blame him for that. I'm also the only person that I trust with a lot of things, but that doesn't mean that that thought process is right, and he doesn't really realize the problems in that thought process. He thinks he's the only one entitled to speak to it and change it and possess it, and it's, I'm repeating myself now, but you get the point. And something else, too, the way that Abbey writes it, he kind of makes you feel like in reading his book and in reading his writings and caring enough about the environment to read things like that, that you are better than the average person, the average tourist, that would just go and kind of, throw their trash around and just take some pretty pictures and move on. The fact that you're thinking about it makes you better. It makes you on his level to be able to possess the environment around you. What he doesn't outright say, but you can pick up on, is the fact that even if you are someone like me who is reading his work and cares enough about the environment to want to read something like this, you are not entitled to it, because he's the only one that's entitled to it, and it's kind of mean and also really easy to miss. He makes you forget that to him you're still just a tourist, and it's impressive. But to thoroughly critique this book, you have to read the entire book. You can't just take excerpts from it. So, I gotta do the generic plug for, you gotta read the book. It's better whenever you read the book. It is better when you read the book, but that's not the point. The summary of the book won't really do it a justice. But what I can do, because I know you're not gonna go read this book, if we're being so for real, I don't go read books after someone tells me to. What I can do, though, is tell you the main thesis and to kind of show the way that the essays are interwoven and connected. So let me try to do that. So throughout the entire book, throughout all of the essays, Abbey sees the American Southwest as the final frontier. And he's kind of acting as a frontiersman to stop Manifest Destiny, even though this is some 100 years after the West was, explored and figured out. But in being a true environmentalist and a frontiersman, he is sitting there documenting all of the flora and fauna and all the pretty stuff going on around him. And it's kind of funny when he does it, I'll admit. Sitting there and writing about a pretty flower is kind of boring, but in the way that he does it, let me just read it to you. I've had this tree under surveillance ever since my arrival at Arches, hoping to learn something from it, to discover its significance, to make a connection through its life and whatever falls beyond. Have failed. The essence of the juniper continues to elude me unless, as I presently suspect, its surface is also the essence. Intuition, sympathy, empathy all fail to guide me into the heart of this being, if it even has a heart. At times I am exasperated by the juniper's static pose. Something in its stylized gesture of appeal, that dead claw against the sky, suggests calipacy. Perhaps the tree is mad, the dull, painful creaking of the branches and the wind indicates, however, an internal effort at liberation. He has another one too, it's a little bit later on in the book, but this one he's talking about a barrel cactus. There are rumors that when dying of thirst, you can save your soul and body by extracting water from the barrel cactus. This is a dubious proposition, and I don't know if anyone has made the experiment. It might be possible in the Sonoran Desert, where the cactus grows as tall as a man and as fat as a keg of beer. In Utah, however, its nearest relative stands no more than a foot high, with needles curved like fishhooks. To even get close to this devilish vegetable, you need leather gloves and a machete. It's a devilish vegetable. You ever kicked a cactus? It's not fun. Abbey is a great narrator for these pieces. He's able to explain them very well because he's very well versed in everything that he's talking about. In one of the chapters, Serpents of Paradise, he kind of shows off his knowledge of the kingdom Animalia. So he has a snake problem, and his fix to the snake problem is to get another snake, which sounds counterintuitive, but trust him. As mentioned before, I share my house trailer with a number of mice. I don't know how many, but apparently only a few, perhaps a single family. They don't disturb me, and are welcome to my crumbs and leavings, where they came from, how they got into the trailer, how they survived before my arrival, for the trailer had been locked up for 6 months. These are puzzling matters I am not prepared to resolve. My only reservation concerning the mice is that they do attract rattlesnakes. I'm sitting on my doorstep early one morning, facing the sun as usual, drinking coffee, when I happen to look down and see almost between my bare feet, only a couple inches to the rear of my heels, the very thing I had in mind. No mistaking that wedge-like head, that tip of horny segmented tail peeping out of the coils. He's under the doorstep in the shade, where the ground and the air remain very cold. In his sluggish condition, he's not likely to strike unless I rouse him by some careless motive of my own. There's a revolver inside the trailer, a huge British Webley 45, loaded, but it's out of reach. Even if I had it in my hands, I'd hesitate to blast a fellow creature at such a close range, shooting between my own legs at a living target flat on solid rock 30 inches away. It'd be like murder, and where would I set my coffee? My cherrywood walking stick leans against the trailer house wall, only a few feet away, but I'm afraid that in leaning over for it, I might stir up the rattler and spill some coffee on his scales. Other considerations come to mind. Arches National Monument is meant to be, among other things, a sanctuary for wildlife, all forms of wildlife. It is my duty as a park ranger to protect, preserve, and defend all living things within the park boundaries, making no exceptions. Even if that were not the case, I have personal convictions to uphold. Ideals, you might say. I prefer to not kill animals. I'm a humanist. I'd rather kill a man than a snake. More on that in a second. What to do? I drink some more coffee and study the dormant reptile at my heels. This won't do. If there are midget rattlers in the area, there may be diamondbacks too, 5, 6, 7 feet long, as thick as a man's wrist. Dangerous. I don't want them camping under my home. It looks as though I'll have to trap the mice. However, before being forced to take that step, I am lucky enough to capture a gopher snake. Hoping to domesticate this sleek, handsome, and docile reptile, I release him into the trailer house and keep him there for several days. Should I attempt to feed him? I decide against it. Let him eat mice. What little water he may need can also be extracted from the flesh of his prey. The gopher snake and I get along nicely. During the day, he curls up like a cat in a warm corner behind the heater, and at night, he goes about his business. The mice, singularly quiet for a change, make themselves scarce. The snake is passive, apparently contented, and makes no resistance when I pick him up with my hands and drape him over an arm or around my neck. When I take him outside into the wind and sunshine, his favorite place seems to be inside my shirt, where he wraps himself around my waist and rests on my belt. In this position, he sometimes sticks his head out between my shirt buttons for a survey of the weather, astonishing and delighting any tourists that may happen to be with me at the time. The scales of the snake are dry and smooth, quite pleasant to the touch. Being a cold-blooded creature, of course, he takes his temperature from that of the immediate environment, in this case, my body. We are compatible, from my point of view, friends. After a week of close association, I turn him loose on the warm sandstone at my doorstep and leave him for a patrol in the park. At noon, I return and he's gone. I search everywhere, beneath and nearby and inside the trailer house, but my companion has disappeared. Has he left the area entirely, or is he hiding somewhere close by? At any rate, I am no more troubled by the rattlesnakes under my door. The way he writes his view of the world is incredibly endearing, right? He's friends with the snake, so much so that he's willing to let it wrap itself around his waist, and he doesn't feel threatened or endangered by it whatsoever. However, though, Abbey, also being Abbey, is a bit of a hypocrite. He's not that nice with other animals. He has this other story where he kills a rabbit, and officially, the reasoning behind it is that they were targeted creatures because they were overpopulating the park. But the way that he writes it, he almost talks about it like he's doing it to prove something to himself, but what he's trying to prove to himself is never really disclosed. It's weird. His writing comes off more like he was kind of just brooding, maybe having a bad day, I don't know. And he just tried to take it out on this poor defenseless rabbit, which, you know, he can't claim to be a humanist. Humanism is a philosophical stance that emphasizes the individual and social potential and agency of human beings, whom it considers to be the starting point for serious and philosophical inquiry. Shout out Wikipedia, it always has something good, like this article of a snail. And it has a great video. He can't claim to have domain over the animals and be required to protect them as part of his park service and then go and kill them just because the park said that they're supposed to go. If you're going to claim domain over the animals and protect them, you have to protect them no matter what. He preaches that he respects everything and still kills it. He complains about the herds of cattle because they annoy him. And he also has a weird thing against ants. He plunges his walking stick straight into an anthill. Cattle and ants are definitely not on the targeted species list at this time. I looked it up, had to make sure. He's just hypocritical, and sometimes he's entirely reasonable. He's a walking dichotomy. Anyway, side tangent over. Back to the way that he views the world around him. Not quite within earshot, but close by, in a shady, dampish, secret place, the sacred datura, moonflower, moonlily, thornapple, blooms in the night, soft, white, trumpet-shaped flowers that open only in darkness and close with the coming of the heat. The datura is sacred to certain cultists because of its content of anthropine, a powerful narcotic of the alkaloid group capable of inducing visionary hallucinations, as the Indians discovered long before the psychedelic craze began. How they could have made such a discovery, nobody knows. But then no one knows how so-called primitive man made his many other discoveries. We must concede that science is nothing new, that research, empirical logic, and the courage to experiment are as old as humanity. At the bare minimum, that excerpt is dripping in almost elitism. And I could see you could interpret that by referring to him as cultists. How he is being racist. And I don't think he meant it that way. To me, he's referring to all primitive man as men before science, not just American Indians. And he's not really attacking them for being, quote-unquote primitive. It's more of just a technological elitism against anybody before his time period. He's just kind of attacking ancient people, I guess. It's in a wraparound way. I don't think he meant it in a bigoted sense. I think that's just kind of his logical train of thought to get from datura to his argument about science and how empirical knowledge is something that we've always sought after. Okay, so I've already discussed Abbey's strange possessiveness of the world around him and his belief of being better than everybody else at protecting the environment and how he's entitled to it. But one thing that I explicitly left out was his misogynistic view of the land. Now, Abbey is kind of a misogynist. I kind of glazed over it in his history, but he had a lot of wives, and he had a lot of cheating incidents with them and affairs. One of his wives he lost to some type of illness, and he wrote a memoir called Black Sun to her, and he dedicated it to her at the beginning of the book. It was a very sweet gesture. Whenever he did that, it came out later that it wasn't for his wife. He didn't write it for his wife. He just dedicated it to her. He wrote it for one of his affair partners he had while she was sick and dying. He had an affair, and then he wrote this book and then, dedicated it to her. And this guy's an environmentalist. But beforehand, I didn't read out the full quote, so let me go back and read that before we talk about it. I want to know it all, possess it all, embrace the entire scene intimately, deeply, totally, as a man desires a beautiful woman. An insane wish? Perhaps not. At least there's nothing else. No one human to dispute the possession with me. That's the part I kept out. On its own, I could make an argument for it being fine. It's kind of just a statement. Just taking it by itself, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but throughout the entire essay, he is kind of always referring to women in a very derogatory way. And granted, this is the 20th century, so I can kind of give him a little bit of credit. But regardless, he says things and it kind of dilutes his point down because at the end of the day, he's just kind of like, oh yeah, and then there's this woman tourist. She sucks. Okay, but now let me get to the big kahuna. We're going to talk about polemic, the whole reason that I've gathered you all here today.
Con mi peluche mirando lo cotidiano, dibujos transformaban el invierno en gran verano. Papá me regaló bajo mi insistencia un juego que trataba de compartir la solvencia, pero en el patio hicieron la competencia. Fue cuando sentí mi primera impotencia. 1970 y 1970 y 1970. 1977, no me diga no, que no lo presiento. Todo lo que cambia lo hará diferente en el año que nació la sepia. 1977, no me diga no, que no lo presiento. Todo lo que cambia lo hará diferente en el año que nació la sepia.
Polemic, Industrial Tourism, and the National Parks is the most popular essay and also the most well-known essay from this entire book. It's also one of my favorites. You just have to get past the Abbiness of it. So this essay acts as the thesis statement of the entire novel, and it's pretty early on, as a thesis statement should be. It covers his issues with the Park Service and tourists. It covers his issue with the government and roadways. It hits all of the points. And in that other book I was talking about, Monkey Wrench Gang, you can see how this essay right here is kind of a non-fiction version of Monkey Wrench Gang. I'll start it kind of light because this essay is heavy. It has a lot of stuff in it. So let me read off a quote he has from the very beginning of it. I watched the clouds drift past the bald peak of Mount Tut. Somebody has to do it. Someone has to do it. He's right. Someone has to watch them clouds. And he also talks about how he visits Moab once a week or so. He has this kind of very insightful thought on why people at the bar he goes to are not really beefing with each other and not really arguing with each other at all. The general atmosphere of the place is free and friendly, quite unlike the sad, sour gloom of most bars I've known, where the nervous men in tight collars brood over their drinks between out-of-tune TV screens and a remorseless clock. Why the difference? I've considered the question and come up with the following solution. 1. These prospectors, miners, etc. have, most of them, been physically active all day out of doors at a mile or more above sea level. They are comfortably tired and relaxed. 2. Most of them have been working alone. The presence of a jostling crowd is therefore not a familiar irritation to be borne with resignation, but rather an unaccustomed pleasure to be enjoyed. 3. Most of them have been making good wages and or doing work that they like to do. They are, you might say, happy. The boom will not last, of course, but this is forgotten, and the ethical and political implications of uranium exploitation are simply unknown in these parts. 4. The nature of their work requires a combination of skills and knowledge, good health and self-reliance, which tend to inspire self-confidence. They need not doubt their manhood. Again, everything is subject to change. 5. Finally, Moab is a Mormon town with funny ways. Hard booze is not sold across the bar except in semi-private clubs, nor even standard beer. These hard-drinking fellers whom I wish to praise are trying to get drunk on 3.2. They rise somewhat heavily from their chairs and bar stools and tramp with frequency and a squelchy, sodden noise towards the pizzers at the back of the room, more waterlogged than intoxicated. I think that the reason he is so confident in his view on these miners is because he is also feeling those exact same thoughts. I think that his manhood is being kind of pushed forward to him. It is being enthralled in the work that he's doing, and that's also, partly because of his kind of misogynistic views on the way that women are in nature environments. He thinks that he, because he's a man, is able to do the things that he does in the park, and that if there was a woman doing that, not so much. Anyway, I digress. This segment is nothing more than a footnote and like an introductory thought into the rest of this essay. I just kind of wanted to give another point to lend some credence to my thought on Abbey being kind of deeply misogynistic. Not that I needed to. He did write a memoir about his affair partner and dedicated it to his dead wife. Continuing on, Abbey talks about the ease and relative freedom of his job at the national park. And he also ties this into saying that the reason that it is so easy for him is because the park is mainly back roads and it doesn't have that many tourists. It's still a national monument at this point. He says, yes, it's a good job. The ease and relative freedom of this lovely job at Arches follow with the comparative absence of the motorized tourists who stay away by the millions. And they stay away because of the unpaved entrance road, the unflushable toilets in the campgrounds, and the fact that most of them have never even heard of Arches National Monument. Could there be a more genuine testimonial to its beauty and integrity? All this must change. I'd been warned on my very first day. Merle and Ford, those are his two bosses, had mentioned something about developments, improvements, a sinister master plan, thinking that they were the dreamers. I paid little heed and had soon forgotten the whole ridiculous business, but only a few days ago something happened that shook me out of my pleasant apathy. This issue he's talking about is the roads in the national parks, and we'll get to that. That's one of his core points. The rest of the ranger and staff at Arches, he has problems with them too, but he also kind of pities them, where the rangers are going quietly nuts answering the same three basic questions 500 times a day. Where's the John? How long does it take to see this place? Where's the Coke machine? Progress has come at last to Arches after a million years of neglect. Industrial tourism has arrived. Abbey thinks that if you go out to a national park, you should go out with the expectation that you're going to be in the wilderness and not some constructed car hellscape. Forget your lunch? Sucks. You can either go back to the entrance station and buy something for an exorbitant price, or just cope with it. Going out into the wilderness is about giving up the creature comforts that we have gotten accustomed to. It's about getting in touch with your more animalistic side. As I'm sitting here recording this, and as I was writing it, I'm sitting in a nice air-conditioned apartment. I have my water bottle right next to me. I don't have to worry about anything with my own personal well-being, but I don't expect those to be included whenever I go out into the wilderness. That defeats the purpose to me. It's not the wilderness if it's air conditioned. Abbey talks about this creature comfort issue and distills it down to talking about cars and roadways entering the park. And he talks about a bunch of different parks that have had that exact thing happen to them and all the bad stuff coming with that. There may be some among the readers of this book, like the earnest engineer, who believe that without question that all and any forms of construction and development are intrinsic goods in national parks as well as anywhere else, who virtually identify quantity with quality and therefore assume that the greater quantity of the traffic, the higher value received. There are some who frankly and boldly advocate for the eradication of the last remnants of wilderness and the complete subjugation of nature and the requirements of not man, but industry. This is a courageous view, admirable in its simplicity and power, and with the weight of all modern history behind it. It is also quite insane. I cannot attempt to deal with it here. There are other readers, I hope, who share my basic assumption that the wilderness is a necessary part of civilization and that the primary responsibility of the national park system is to preserve intact and undiminished what little remains. Most readers, while generally sympathetic to the latter point of view, will feel, as do the administrators of the National Park Service, that although wilderness is a fine thing, certain compromises and adjustments are necessary in order to meet the ever-expanding demand for outdoor recreation. It is precisely this question that I would like to examine now. I like how he kind of just completely throws away the idea of developing the natural world around him. He just tosses it away as some delusion of a Waterloo graduate or something like that. It's very fitting for him, and it's not an insane thought. I fall in the latter group of preservationism, the idea of preserving the world as it is around you, if you can pick up by my ramblings. Now let's see how he quantifies my argument. It's not going to be controversial or questionable or anything like that, right? The first issue that appears when we get into this matter, the most important issue and perhaps the only issue, is the one called accessibility. The developers insist that the parks must be made fully accessible not only to people but also their machines, that is, to automobiles, motorboats, etc. The preservers argue, in principle at least, that the wilderness and motors are incompatible and that the former can best be experienced, understood, and enjoyed when the machines are left behind where they belong, on the superhighways and in the parking lots, on the reservoirs and in the marinas. Good start, good start. What does accessibility mean? Is there any spot on Earth that men have not proved accessible by the simplest means? Feet and legs and heart. Even Mount McKinley, even Everest have been surmounted by men on foot. Some of them, incidentally, rank amateurs to the horror and indignation of professional mountaineers. The interior of the Grand Canyon, a fiercely hot and hostile abyss, is visited each summer by thousands and thousands of tourists of the most banal and unadventurous type, many of them on foot, self-propelled, so to speak, and the others on the backs of mules. Thousands climb each summer to the summit of Mount Whitney, the highest point in the 48 United States, while multitudes of others wander on foot or on horseback through the ranges of the Sierras, the Rockies, the Big Smokies, the Cascades, and the mountains of New England. Still more hundreds and thousands float or paddle each year down the currents of the Salmon, the Snake, the Algas, the Yampa, the Green, the Rio Grande, the Ozarks, the St. Croix, and those portions of the Colorado that have not yet been destroyed by dam builders. And the most significant, these hordes of unmotorized tourists, hungry for the taste of the difficult, the original, the real, do not solely consist of young and athletic, but also of old folk, fat folk, pale-faced office clerks who don't know a rucksack from a haversack, and even children. The one thing that they all have in common is the refusal to live like sardines in a can. They are determined each year to get outside of their motor cars for a few weeks. That being the case, why is the Park Service generally so anxious to accommodate the other crowd, the indolent millions born on wheels and suckle on gasoline who expect and demand paved highways to lead them in comfort, ease, and safety into every nook and corner of the national parks? For the answer to that, we must consider the character of what I call industrial tourism and the quality of unmechanized tourists, the wheelchair explorers, who are at once the consumers, the raw material, and the victims of industrial tourism. He paints anyone who is unable to go and explore these parks by themselves on foot as victims of the industrial hegemon. I'm not going to try to high horse Abbey and talk about the ADA people or the people with life-altering, crippling illnesses or weaknesses that make it so they can't go and explore national parks without being driven in there. But what about them, Abbey? For the sake of his argument, he's clearly trying to sideline them and act like they just don't exist. But I don't necessarily disagree with his argument. I can see its merits. There is definitely an argument to be made that parks cater way too much to automobiles and have lost their true wilderness, and that they have unintentionally sidelined the experience of going out and actually exploring it yourself and finding things that are cool that you haven't seen before in favor of driving through it. I went on a desert road trip last year, and one of my biggest regrets in doing it is that over the entire 2-week span I tried to cram in, I want to say 8 different states. Most of the national parks that I stopped at, I kind of just drove through. Like Zion, I just drove down and I tried to get out, but it was so hot and I was uncomfortable, so I just decided to not do it. No reason I need to be out there hiking in 130-degree heat, but I am part of the problem. I am the people that he is talking about hating. That's me. But the reason that I did what I did, besides the heat, the biggest limiter that I had was the fact that I had a job I had to go back to. I didn't get the luxury of just being able to sit out in the park. I had 2 weeks off. And besides paying for the trip, I had to accommodate the fact that I was missing so much work. I wasn't earning money, I was just burning it, so I needed to do it as quickly as possible. I didn't have the luxury of being able to just stay out there as long as I wanted like he does. Continuing on with his argument over industrial tourism. They work hard, these people. They roll up incredible mileages on their odometers, rack up state after state in a 2-week transcontinental motor marathon, knock off one national park after another, take millions of square yards of photographs, and endure the prolonged discomforts, the tedious traffic jams, the awful food of park cafeterias and roadside eateries, the nocturnal search for a place to sleep or camp, the dreary routine of one-stop service, the endless lines of creeping traffic, the smell of exhaust fumes, the ever-proliferating rules and regulations, the fees and bills and service charges, the boiling radiator and flat tire and the vapor lock, the surly retorts of room clerks and traffic cops, the incessant jostling of anxious crowds, the irritating restlessness of their children, the worry of their wives, and the long drive home at night in a stream of racing cars against another stream of racing cars in the opposite direction, passing now and then the obscure tangle, the shattered glass, the patrolman's lurid blinker light of one more wreck. Hard work and risky. Too much for some, who have given up the struggle on the highways in exchange for an entirely different kind of vacation. Out in the open on their feet, following the quiet trail through the forests and mountains, bedding down in the evening under the stars. And when they feel like it, at a time when industrial tourists are still hunting for a place to park their automobiles. Industrial tourism is a threat to national parks. But the chief victims of the system are the motorized tourists. So long as they are unwilling to crawl out of their cars, they will not discover the treasures of the national parks and will never escape the stress and turmoil of those urban-suburban complexes which they had hoped, presumably, to leave for a while. How to pry the tourists out of their automobiles, out of their back-breaking, upholstered, mechanized wheelchairs, and onto their feet, onto the strange warmth and solidarity of Mother Earth again. This is a problem which the Park Service should confront directly, not evasively, and which it cannot be resolved by simply submitting and conforming to the automobile habit. The automobile, which began as a transportation convenience, has become a bloody tyrant, 50,000 lives a year, and it is the responsibility of the Park Service, as well as everyone else concerned with preserving both wilderness and civilization, to begin a campaign of resistance. The automobile combine has almost succeeded in strangling our cities. We need not let it destroy our national parks. It will be objected that a constantly increasing population makes resistance and conservation a hopeless battle. This is true. Unless a way is found to stabilize the nation's population, the parks cannot be saved, or anything else worth a damn. Wilderness preservation, like 100 other good causes, will be forgotten under the overwhelming pressure of a struggle for mere survival and sanity in a completely urbanized, completely industrialized, ever more crowded environment. For my own part, I would rather take my chances in a thermonuclear war than live in such a world. Assuming that, however, that population growth will be halted at a tolerable level before catastrophe does it for us, it remains permissible to talk about such things as in the national parks. Having indulged myself in a number of harsh judgments upon the Park Service, the tourist industry, and the motoring public, I now feel entitled to make some constructive, practical, sensible proposals for the salvation of the parks and the people. When he's going on in sections like this is what I'm talking about him making a valid argument for things. He's just doing it from a place of privilege he doesn't realize that he's in. And that's kind of the worst part of his entire argument. It's from an ivory tower, and if he realized he was in that ivory tower, it would have been a way stronger argument, but he doesn't, so it has its very glaring weaknesses. But I also think he does kind of realize he's from an ivory tower to some extent because of that whole opening segment. He is aware that there are flaws that he cannot separate from his argument, and it's kind of a noble cause to realize that you have flaws in your thinking, but still to be so proud about your flaws and just say your thoughts anyway. Anyway, his list of ways to fix it, the first item on the list goes as follows. No more cars in national parks. Let the people walk or ride horses, bicycles, mules, wild pigs, anything, but keep the motorized automobiles and the motorcycles and all their motorized relatives out. We have agreed to not drive our automobiles into cathedrals, concert halls, art museums, legislative assemblies, private bedrooms, and the other sanctums of our culture. We should treat national parks with the same deference, for they, too, are holy places. An increasingly pagan and hedonistic people, thank God. We are learning finally that the forests and the mountains and the desert and the canyons are holier than our churches, therefore let us behave accordingly. Consider a concrete example and what can be done with it. Yosemite Valley and Yosemite Valley National Park. At present, a dusty, milling confusion of motor vehicles and ponderous camping machinery. It could be returned to relative beauty and order by the simple expedient of requiring all visitors at the park entrance to lock up their automobiles and continue their tour on the seats of good workable bicycles, supplied free of charge by the United States government. Let our people travel light and free on their bicycles, nothing on their backs but a shirt, nothing tied to the bike but a slicker in case of rain. Their bedrolls, their backpacks, their tents, their food, and cooking kits will be trucked in for them free of charge to the campground of their choice in the valley by the Park Service. why not? The roads will still be there. Once in the valley, they will find the concessionaires waiting, ready to supply whatever needs they might have overlooked, to furnish rooms and meals for those who don't want to camp out. The same thing can be done at Grand Canyon or at Yellowstone or any of the other shrines to the out of doors. There's no compelling reason, for example, why tourists need to drive their automobiles to the very brink of the Grand Canyon South Rim. They could walk the last mile. Better yet, the Park Service should build an enormous parking lot about 10 miles south of the Grand Canyon Village and another east of Desert View. At those points, as at Yosemite, our people could emerge from their steaming shells of steel and glass and climb upon horses or bicycles for the final leg of the journey. On the rim, at present, the hotels and restaurants will remain to serve the physical needs of the park visitors. Trips along the rim would also be made on foot, on horseback, or utilizing the paved roads which already exist, on bicycles. For those willing to go all the way from one parking lot to another, a distance of some 60 or 70 miles, we might provide bus services back to their cars, a service which would at the same time effect a convenient exchange of bicycles or horses between the two terminals. What about children? What about the aged and infirm? Frankly, we need to waste little sympathy on these two pressure groups. Dude, children too small to ride bicycles and too heavy to be borne on their parents' backs need only wait a few years. If they are not run over by automobiles, they will grow into a lifetime of joyous adventure. If we save the parks and leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. The aged merit even less sympathy. After all, they had the opportunity to see the country when it was still relatively unspoiled. However, we'll stretch a point for those too old or too sickly to mount a bicycle and let them ride shuttle buses. I like your ideas, I really do, and I want to support you. I at least can sympathize with you. But you can't just go and say that you don't want to waste any sympathy on people who are disabled or old or too young to be able to go out and do it themselves. I like the idea of not having any more roads in national parks. I really do. I like the idea of being removed from society and order and kind of just going back to the wilds. The whole Chris McCandless thing. But I also think that everyone deserves an equal opportunity to be able to go out there and see that type of stuff. They shouldn't have to rely on the stories or pictures or videos of other people doing it. Same thing goes financially. I think that everyone should be able to go out there, but that's a whole other point, and I don't have time to get into the whole economic system that makes it so people can't go and do that. And none of this is to say that I expect someone who's in an iron lung or Walter Jr. or somebody like that to be able to go hike Devil's Thumb in Denali National Park, but it's anything that is relatively easy they should be able to go do. They should have the opportunity to be able to go see the more scenic parts of the site. I mean, every time I read that I almost crack because it's like it's insane. It's like anesthetic. It's weird. It's almost like he's doing a bit. I don't know what the happy middle ground is between no roads and roads for disabled people. I'm not a city planner, nor am I a national park planner, if that's a thing, but somewhere in there has to be the option for people who can't go out there themselves to be able to go see it without disturbing it for the rest of us. I refuse to believe that that's simply impossible. It's a nice thought. I don't see it happening though, but it's a nice thought. Point numero dos. No more new roads in national parks. After banning private automobiles, the second step should be easy. Where paved roads are already in existence, there will be reserved for bicycles and essential in-park services such as shuttle buses, the trucking of camping gear and concessionaire supplies. Where the dirt roads already exist, they will be reserved for non-motorized traffic. Plans for new roads can be discarded and in their place a program of trail building begun, badly needed in some of the parks and in many of the national monuments. In mountainous areas, it might be desirable to build an emergency shelter along the trails and bike roads. In desert regions, a water supply might have to be provided at certain points, wells drilled and hand pumps installed if feasible. Once people are liberated from the confines of automobiles, there will be a greatly increased interest in hiking, exploring, and backcountry pack trips. Fortunately, the parks, by merely eliminating all motorized traffic, will come to seem far bigger than they are now. They will have more room. There will be more room for more persons, an astonishing expansion of pace. This follows from the interesting fact that a motorized vehicle, when not at rest, requires a volume of space far out of proportion to its size. You remember that one car ad, and it was like all the people without their cars, and they were just running on the roads? That he's right. They take up gigantic amounts of space. I was driving on the interstate a few days ago, and I looked around, and assuming that there was just one person in each one of those cars, this mile stretch of cars had sub 50 people on it. It's strange. And it was a busy time on the interstate too. It wasn't like it was the middle of the night. It was 5 o'clock rush hour traffic on a city interstate. To illustrate, imagine a lake approximately 10 miles long and on average 1 mile wide. A single motorboat could easily circumvent the lake in an hour. 10 motorboats could begin to crowd it. 20 or 30, all in operation, would dominate the lake to the exclusion of any other form of activity. And 50 would create hazards, confusion, and turmoil that make pleasure impossible. Suppose we banned motorboats and allowed only canoes and rowboats. We would see at once the lake seem 10 or perhaps 100 times bigger. Just as an example of that effect too in Red Dead 2.
Arthur Taylor.
Tell her what?
She ain't coming with us to collect her husband.
Abigail, you ain't coming, that's the end of the matter.
The map is approximately the same size as the map of Grand Theft Auto 5, even though it feels significantly bigger. It's supposed to be 5 different states, and GTA 5 is supposed to just be 1. And it feels so much bigger because Arthur and his horse move significantly slower than whatever sports car you decide to jack as Michael. The same thing holds true to an even greater degree for the automobile. Distance and space are functions of speed and time. Without expending a single dollar from the United States Treasury, we could, if we wanted to, multiply the area of our national parks tenfold or 100-fold simply by banning private automobiles. The next generation, all 250 million of them, would be grateful to us. True dat, brother. But I agree with his point here too. He didn't bring any ableism in, but the only reason that people use cars is for convenience. It is inconvenient to have to walk to a store in 90-degree heat during the summertime, but it is convenient to be able to get in your car, turn a key, and it be a cool 63 degrees, and you drive there in an eighth of the time. But regardless, if you were to take away the ability to travel in comfort, take away that crutch, people would start to notice the world around them more and enjoy it more. I mean, when was the last time you looked out your car window and actually looked at the landscape going past you? I bet it's been a while, at least. For me it is. It kind of just all becomes the exact same. It's that psychological effect, the one where you just kind of space your drive, you just kind of get there. I think that the reason that most people kind of disregard the environment isn't because they actually don't care about the environment, but it's because they have become entirely disconnected from it. They don't realize how important it is for their well-being because they're inside all day, and if they do realize how important it is, it's just because they've read an article on a news website about how this company has gone and started fracking, or this other company has spilt oil in an ocean somewhere, and how it's bad for the environment, how it's going to change the climate, how it's going to raise the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, poke another hole in the ozone layer. It's all armchair knowledge. And on a smaller scale that isn't, global climate change, if you were to go to a national park and just get out of your car and walk instead of driving through it, you would start to really take in the world around you. That boundary of the car window keeps you isolated. It kind of makes it a picture instead of a three-dimensional space. I wouldn't make an argument that I've played American Truck Sim, therefore I've seen the entirety of the United States. That's just not accurate, but I digress. And I really hate to interject this essay section, but I kind of want to bring in this other point about the way that Abbey feels about tourists. I just kind of think it's interesting. This would be good country, a tourist says to me. If only you had some water. He's from Cleveland, Ohio. If we had water here, I reply, this country would not be what it is. It would be like Ohio, wet and humid and hydrological, all covered with cabbage farms and golf courses. Instead of this lovely barren desert, we would have only another blooming garden state like New Jersey. See what I mean? If you had more water, more people could live here. Yes, sir. And where would people go when they wanted to see something besides people? I'm glad too, sir. We're in perfect agreement. You wouldn't want to live here. I wouldn't want to live in Cleveland. We're both satisfied with the arrangement as it is. Why change it? Agreed. We shake hands and the tourist from Ohio goes away pleased, as I am pleased. Each of us thinking that he has taught the other something new. This segment brings up an important point with Abbey and the way that he dislikes the other ecological areas of the United States.
No!
He favors the desert. I don't blame him. He also dislikes the people from the United States too. It's kind of a microcosm of that pretentiousness that he's talking about, but also it shows off his self-awareness that he went on about in the first segment of the book I read. He does make the tourist seem like a villain, but he's also aware that they both made each other feel like they taught each other something. That's a level of self-awareness that's better than him just being like, and I really showed him. Tourists like the guy from Cleveland, from Abbey's point of view, are the reason that parks are being quote-unquote destroyed and then turned into something that he doesn't like as much. The roads and the cars and the rangering stations, the outhouse and the Coke machines, Johns, all of that is because people come to these parks, these barren wildernesses, and they complain about not having the creature comforts they're used to, and then to make the people happy because they fundamentally are a branch of a government which is supposed to serve the people first, they go and they add these things in. From my perspective, from our perspective, it's kind of pretentious, Abbey's way of talking about this tourist. I cannot deny that. However, thinking about the people who come into the parks and complain about things like that to the rangers, can you really blame the rangers for being a little standoffish? I had this teacher in high school. His name was Mr. Russell. He was incredibly pretentious, and I have a very deep-seated fear of turning into him. He used to have this quote that he would say to a bunch of high schoolers, keep that in mind. Is libertarianism ideological adolescence? It's a bit of a mouthful. Saying that quote to a bunch of high schoolers who are just aching to fight against authority and don't want to be told what to do is a little bit wild, but for some reason that quote really stuck with me. I kind of identify with the libertarian ideological standpoint with some qualms with it, within reason, of course. But for an answer to that question, is libertarianism ideological adolescence? Yes. Yes, it is. But with personal freedoms, I think that being able to do whatever you want to do is vital to one's mental health health, their physical and spiritual well-being. You shouldn't be caged and told what you can and cannot do. Having someone constantly breathe down the back of your neck is killer to one's morale and self-worth, and makes them feel untrustworthy, like they can't do anything by themselves. All of that is to say that if someone wants to shoot themselves in the foot, they should be allowed to, and that is an extreme example, I understand. As long as they are only hurting themselves, they're not being detrimental to anybody else, it should be permissible. At least morally speaking, I think it is. And that's what Abbey's trying to say. It's just a little bit muddled down through all of his banter. He just wants people to be able to do whatever they want to do, and he thinks that cars in parks and the way that the federal government is leaning towards overreaching in national parks and developing them, he thinks that that is the issue. I think through all of this, what Abbey is trying to say is that personal freedoms are important. He wants to advocate for personal freedoms. The freedom to go and explore the world and be able to do whatever you want to do without having a paved road that gives you guidance on where you can and cannot go. If someone wants to go out and hike a dangerous and untrodden trail in backcountry without a phone, or go cave diving with their kid and for some reason not tell their family and get stuck, let them. Actually, not if they have a kid. Don't bring the kid down there. But if they want to do it by themselves and they don't have a family, more power to them. It's a bit of an immature standpoint, and I understand that, but personal freedoms are important. And Abbey is a complicated man, and it's hard to distill him down into a 19-page script for a YouTube video essay. Personal freedoms and misogynistic views and an environmentalist standpoint, and all of that wrapped into one man who, for some reason, really hates disabled people, women, and fat people. But I think one of the most important and frankly beautiful pieces is the fact that all of it is open to individual interpretation. I have that personal experience with that high school teacher who said, "Is libertarianism ideological adolescence?" Therefore, that's the way that I interpret his work. And I think that if you read Polemic, it would be interpreted differently by you. I'm terrible at conclusions. I'm not good at writing them. I don't really have anything profound to say here. Right, thank you for listening to me ramble. I have tried to record this video way too many times, and it's kind of starting to wear on me and wear a hole in my binder. My script for it is 19 pages, and I just keep printing it out. This is probably my 7th copy of it by now. I don't really have anything else here to say, so next up on the Hiji channel, we're going to talk about this image and why it looks like that. Howdy folks, welcome. This is your national park, established for the pleasure of you and all people everywhere. Park your car, jeep, truck, tank, motorbike, motorboat, jet boat, airboat, submarine, airplane, jet plane, helicopter, hovercraft, winged motorcycle, snowmobile, rocket ship, or any other conceivable type of motorized vehicle in the world's biggest parking lot behind the comfort station immediately to your rear. Get out of your motorized vehicle, get on your horse, mule, bicycle, or feet, and come on in. Enjoy yourselves. This here park is for the people.